everyone back to Fantasy Daily. It is episode 1 of season 2. It is day 1 of the 2022 fantasy football season. I am stoked to be here. I'm so excited you guys are back joining me here. And we got an extra special surprise today. Joining us on the show for the first time ever, introducing my man, the lead analyst now here at Fantasy Daily, John Landry. John, thank you so much for joining me, man. Thanks so much for being here. Like I said, it's always weird when I'm doing these shows by myself and I'm kind of just talking to the camera and I got really nothing to ping pong off of. So, John, so glad that you're finally joining the show, that I got you here working on the show, because this man knows how to move through data. This man knows how to see things that you don't usually see, things that are unconventional, and that's what we do here on Fantasy Daily, a little bit unconventional, against the grain analytics that we like to pay attention to get those hard results that we need to win us that fantasy championship. So, John Landry, how you feeling, getting ready to jump into the 2022 fantasy football season, my man?
I am very excited. It's like Christmas around here when fantasy season rolls up. I mean, think about it's like a little kid thinking about Christmas all year. I'm super excited for the fantasy season for 2022.
Yeah, it's the most wonderful time of the year, man. Draft day. It's our holiday. It's the best time of the year. All right, well, we got a lot coming to you this year. We got a lot planned for the season leading up to NFL kickoff. We got about less than a month for that. I think it's September 5th is the first day, something like that, September 5th, September 8th. That's the first day. So we got a lot to cover before then. Obviously, draft season is upon us. It's really kicking up. People starting to make those hard decisions on who do I draft in the first round, the second round, third round. How do I start the foundation of my team? Well, we got a lot of analysis here today on that because we are doing the running back draft or pass episode. So previously, in previous seasons on Fantasy Daily, this was the undraftables episode. Basically, we take a bunch of players who, are talked about. We say we're out on them. We don't want them. We're not going to risk having them on our team. So to make this year a little bit, more fun, a little bit more cohesive, now that we got two, people to bounce it off here, we added about 9 players to this, and we're going to basically say where they are, what they're doing, how we feel about them, a heat check. Are we drafting them at that ADP? Or are we passing on them to go to somebody else and kind of set a better foundation for our team? So let's get right into it. Let's roll right into this because we got a lot of guys to cover, and we love these talking points. We like to, kind of ramble through them and give our analysis and what we've been feeling all offseason because we got a lot of content to cover. We got a lot to go through. So let us kick it off with probably the most controversial player in the offseason, especially going into draft season at that early round ADP. Currently going at the 102, Christian McCaffrey, the second pick taken off the board. John, as the lead analyst here, your first day on the show, let's go ahead and let you take the lead here on CMC.
Let me start by pointing out the obvious. McCaffrey was injured. Rolled ankle, hamstring, all that kind of stuff that can be nagging. But the offseason has come and is ending, and I'm sure he's feeling healthy. So I am willing at the 102 to draft him. And that's at a really high risk, but an even higher reward. In a PPR league, he could easily dominate and contend with Taylor to be the number 1 on the year. His PPR stats, extreme, 100 targets typically. On the ground, about 1,000 yards kind of guy. But what I like the most is when he plays to be the RB1. Last year he played 3 games, 20-plus points each game. The year before that, only 7 games. 3 games were pretty bad. He played less than 50% of that game, probably left because he was injured. But the 4 games where he played more than 50%, 3 of them were 20-plus point games. So when he plays, he scores big, and I'm willing to take that chance at the 102.
Right. See, and I understand the appeal, like the high risk, high reward. It's hard to not look at Christian McCaffrey as that player, as basically the most dominant running back in football. For me personally, CMC has become just too rich for my blood at that ADP. When you're looking at who's around it, the Jonathan Taylor, the Austin Eckler, the Derrick Henry, it's really difficult for me to place CMC above any of those 4 players. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor's probably going to go at the 101. But, when you're looking at what you get for Jonathan Taylor, or what somebody's going to get out of Jonathan Taylor at the 101, and what you could possibly get and more than likely going to get out of Derrick Henry and Austin Eckler, For me, that early round ADP at the 102 is just, like I said, way too rich for my blood. John laid the stats on you there, I agree with the stat line of, CMC being that dominant. I do think that you're going to see a lot more of a committee. You're going to see a lot more Chuba Hubbard. I don't think there's going to be a ton of games where you see CMC just completely take the lead. Obviously, when the ball is in his hands, he's absolutely dominant. But I do believe that those games of him having high volume are behind us outside of a few outlier games. And like I said, for the ADP, I would much rather have somebody like Austin Eckler who, is probably more than likely going to do what he's been doing. Same thing with Derrick Henry. He's more than likely going to keep being the guy that you drafted him as. And for CMC at the 102, the risk-reward section for me, it's not in the 102. It's not in the first round. If I'm drafting somebody in the first round, it has to be somebody who I am guaranteed going to get that, that efficiency out of. And, at this point, in August 1st, going into the draft season, I am willing to say right now that if I'm at the 102 and Jonathan Taylor goes at the 101, I'm more than likely taking Derrick Henry or Austin Eckler. You can take your preference there, but me personally, I'm more than likely taking Derrick Henry. I would even rather take Cooper Kupp than take a Christian McCaffrey at this point. So I do believe that by the time you get to that point where you want to draft, CMC and you're looking at, him or somebody else, I'd be taking a Derrick Henry, and I'm looking at the CMC later on in drafts. He's obviously not going to make it there, but for me personally, he'd have to make it to the third or fourth round for me to get anywhere close to considering him. So for me, it's a pass on Christian McCaffrey going into this season. I just can't take that chance with them. I really can't.
Between you and I, it doesn't need to be brought up, but I like McCaffrey because Henry might get 350 touches, and Eckler might get close to 300 touches, combined with passing. But Eckler's on a team that's heavy pass first, and Henry's on a team that Henry's a player that doesn't do PPR too much. So McCaffrey gets the best of both. So that's why I like McCaffrey.
And I definitely see the appeal because, like you're saying, when it comes to the big upside of what CMC can be, it's there, you know what I mean? And it's not going to exist where you want it to with Eckler and Derrick Henry. But like I said, I think it's part of that. It's just that round one, kind of anxiety to me where I know that I'm going to get the consistency from Henry and Eckler. And it's really just the injury concern holding me back. That, I just think this is Christian McCaffrey's new normal. But at the same exact time, I feel like he's one of those players where I don't mind if the egg is on my face and I don't get Christian McCaffrey. I pass him up at the 102 because team structure-wise, I'll feel a lot better going into the season. I won't feel as worried, and I won't try to stack my my running backs at the back half of the draft, which is usually what I end up doing if I end up with a player that I'm afraid of, like Dalvin Cook. I usually try to stack running backs later on in the draft. But yeah, good stuff there for CMC. Like I said, he's one of those players I hope I'm wrong about. I hope I'm wrong and we get CMC back and then we can flex him right back into there. So moving on to the Patriots running backs. Now, John, me and you got a similar thesis here on the Patriots running backs and what you do with them. So in question right now, we're talking about Ramondre Stevenson. He is currently going at the ADP 108. And Damian Harris is currently going at the ADP of 65. So these are really high draft capitals for what you're paying for. And then obviously you got Pierre Strong. He was just drafted by the Patriots, so he's still in the mix. But for me personally, I'm just going to take the lead on this one and say that, it's much of the same when it comes to the Patriots, in general. Outside of Hunter Henry, and maybe if Devontae Parker becomes that player you're hoping he can be with Mac Jones, you don't really want to touch anybody on the Patriots, and especially from the running backs, committee that we've seen in the past. You still have James White there. The carousel just always continues, and Bill Belichick has never really played towards who is going to be, the lead back throughout the year, who's going to be the one and then the two and flex to them. It's based on what they're doing that week, who they are playing and how they're going to play against that team and how they want to switch up their identity. So you can never really put, a firm bet on whoever it's going to be that week. And that's really my gripe, that it will always be with the Patriots running back, probably as long as Bill Belichick's there. And basically until further notice, until I see something that I can really trust in, it's really hard for me to trust in, any of them. So, going around them, especially with Damian Harris going in the 6th round, there's tons of wide receivers. We'll talk about them on the wide receiver show tomorrow. Going in that area that I would rather have. There's a lot of running backs that you could scoop up around in that area. And then Ramondre Stevenson, he's more 10th round where you're grabbing flyers and stuff like that. But same thing. I'd rather pad wide receivers and different running backs than try to take a bet on one of these guys for the Patriots backfield.
So I also share a similar philosophy of Patriots running backs, and that's to abandon them in fantasy. Abandon all Patriot players in fantasy. It's just too risky. You never know what Bill's going to do. But speak a little deeper on it. Harris had an excellent year last year. He was RB14, PPR, RB8 in standard. That's huge for standard. And he had 15 touchdowns last year, which is what bumped him so high up in the ranks. But at where he's going in the draft, if you haven't drafted a second running back, I don't think I'd still draft Harris. You got some players still, farther down the line from him that's worth drafting that could have an equal, return on investment. And the receivers going around him, Mooney, I'm on St. Brown. I'm willing to take shots on those guys over Harris and take another round or so to get a running back. With Ramondre, sure, he's further down, less invested, but his numbers are inconsistent. He had a good game when Harris was out, so he got to be the RB1 the whole game. Had an excellent time, but he had no one to share the work with. And then he had a decent game with Buffalo when they decided to only have 3 pass attempts. So, when you have 83 rush attempts through the whole game, plenty of opportunity. But even in that round, 10th round, I would not draft Stevenson. So, with committee in the Patriots backfield, with James White still an injury, he's not going to be a big factor. Pierstrom, I don't expect Belichick to give the rookie that much work, especially when he has 2 established running backs already on the team. It's a hard pass on all Patriots. Not just on the Patriots, AFC East running backs in general. Just don't do it.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a different kind of wasteland, and, we don't want to play that lottery. Me and John both out on those Patriots running backs. We are moving on now to another committee to speak of. This one a little bit more tantalizing, and that would be the Seattle running backs backfield. John, I really only got 1 point to make on this, so I'm going to let you take the lead on this one again. For Seattle. So tell me, what do you think about the Seattles? Rashad Penny, Chris Carson's out of here, Kenneth Walker getting the draft nod. So what do you think?
I think you and I are going to share a similar idea here. I don't know enough about Ken Walker to want to draft him. He doesn't have the height that Barkley had, so I'm not biting at his draft capital. He's going somewhere in, I think, the 7th round, maybe 6th round. Way too high for me for an unestablished rookie. But Rashad Penny, that's what I'm buying into. He had excellent end of season last year. We know he's talented, and Pete Carroll loves his guys. He loves Carson. Carson's not there. He loves Penny. Seattle runs more than any other team. They want to run. They got Geno Smith and Drew Lock, who are not going to be able to fulfill the fantasy wants we have for Lockett and Metcalf. So I think Penny going in about the 9th round, smash. Draft Penny. Draft him over Harris. And honestly, draft him over Harris.
Absolutely. So, yeah, like you said, we're going to share similar points on this one because I am over the moon about Rashad Penny going into this year. Like you said, he had a great end of season from weeks 14 through 18. He was the #1 running back in the NFL. Like you said, the Seattle Seahawks want to run the ball like crazy. Drew Lock coming to town with Noah Fant, not a crazy amount of, hype that goes into that passing game, not a lot of confidence that goes into that offense, and the big question in the offseason that a lot of people talk about is the wide receivers. Is it going to be DK Metcalf or Lockett? Can you trust either one of them? But I feel like the secret sauce here within, a lot of drafts and even just within Seattle is Rashad Penny. Like John said, Pete Carroll, very loyal to his people. Rashad Penny had running back one status, and he could probably fill that role while Chris Carson was there, but they kept running with Chris Carson. They kept pounding the ball with him. So I think that, with Rashad Penny being the next guy in line, Pete Carroll's going to stay kind of old school to where, you paid your dues, you waited your turn, now it's your turn to go. So I do expect a big, big season from Penny. And like you said, even the draft capital that we're looking at, when you look at, Kenneth Walker, he's going in the 7th round, around 74th overall. Rashad Penny's going in the 9th round at 100th overall. And I expect Rashad Penny, and I think that Rashad Penny could easily be one of those players that's going very, very late in drafts. You can get him basically for, a late 9th and early 10th, maybe even the 11th if he slips somewhere. And he could turn into a top 10 running back on the season. And I think Rashad Penny definitely has that potential with, so many question marks surrounding the passing game. The fact that they love running the ball and they're going to keep doing it. I think that Rashad Penny, we've been waiting for Rashad Penny season. We saw it at the end of the year, and I think it's going to keep rolling right into the beginning of the year. And if you get him in the 9th or 10th round, I think you're going to be really, really excited with what you get back for Rashad Penny as far as your draft value. So me and John both in the camp there. Love Rashad Penny. Moving on to the Denver Broncos backfield now. We're going to be talking about Melvin Gordon, but we can't be talking about Melvin Gordon without me at least bringing some acknowledgement to the fact that the Denver Broncos have broken my heart and gotten rid of, the hopes that Javonte Williams will be a bona fide running back one competing with the Jonathan Taylors, the Christian McCaffreys, the Derrick Henry. If this was Javonte's backfield by himself, we all expected him to be up there in that conversation. So Melvin Gordon currently going around the 102, which is the 9th round. That's pretty deep for somebody like Melvin Gordon to go. When you got Javonte going in the 3rd, 4th round, that kind of draft capital for somebody like Javonte Williams, that's people, saying we're going to definitely have him be the guy going forward, and Melvin Gordon is just going to spell him on 3rd down and maybe get some goal line nods, and that's it. And, I don't think that that's the case at all. I believe that Javonte is going to, be way too overdrafted. He's going to see a lot of, relief roles and play some running back too, may have some, drives dedicated to him. But with Russell Wilson coming in there, with the way that Russell Wilson has played and had, just straight bully backs for his entire career, I think Melvin Gordon is another one of those players who's super, super undervalued going in the 9th round, same, kind of area as Rashad Penny. And he could be a running back two on your team, guaranteed week in and week out to the confidence, and you'll have the confidence to want to slate him in a running back two pinch or in your flex every single week. And you can kind of have that confidence that he's going to be there. So I think Javonte Williams going way too overdrafted, and Melvin Gordon is in just a beautiful spot where I definitely want to draft him. So John, what do you think? Melvin Gordon going into 2022?
At the 9th round, I love Melvin Gordon in the 2022 season. They literally split carries. They had the same amount of carries each. So when you look at the snap count, Javonte had a lower snap percentage. So that means Gordon was trusted. Now, granted, Javonte had more PPR value, but we all know Gordon's capable of doing that. And for Javonte's draft capital, I expect him to get a little bit more workload. He's no longer like a rookie. Gordon's a little bit older. And with Wilson coming in, I'm sure it can change the dynamic of the play style, because hopefully Broncos will let Russell cook again. So I think having to draft Williams in the 3rd, too high, especially with other running backs there, having to draft Gordon in the 9th, every team.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a smash play, and I think a lot of people who draft Melvin Gordon that late, you're going to be very pleasantly surprised with the return that you get back on him and how often you can slate him in there and just, kind of set it and forget it with Melvin Gordon. I think the consistency is there, and it's going to remain there. Moving on to the Tampa Bay backfield, we're going to be talking about Leonard Fournette, currently going at the 25th spot in the 3rd round. He's right around kind of that area that we've been kind of talking about, almost, feeling of the cliff where, you kind of have to make up your mind for me. make up your mind on who's going to be, your running back 2 or maybe even your running back 1 if you went wide receiver, tight end, something like that. So for Leonard Fournette, for me, at the 3rd round, around that pick, it's definitely a pass for me, and it's not because of the camp reports of him being overweight. I think that's all fun tabloids that just seem to find their way to Brady always. But my pass is really based on his ADP and what I really need out of somebody that I'm drafting in that spot. So it's kind of the same argument that I had for Christian McCaffrey, where if I'm in the 3rd round, around that area, I'm really setting up the foundation for my team, and I want to only pick players that I'm super confident are going to return that value immediately and throughout the duration of the season. So with Keyshawn Vaughn and Rachaad White there joining the team, I do think that Leonard Fournette's going to lose some of his pass catching ability that is kind of giving him so much, fantasy, power over the last year or so with Brady. But I think when you look at that gap between running back 6 and running back 12, which is where Leonard Fournette was last year, and if everybody in that spot, I think out of everybody, he's the easiest and the most likely to fall down a draft, a draft tier, because that gap's not that long. So if you're losing some of those passes and a couple of those touchdowns, you're going to fall out of that spot pretty quickly. So I just don't see it, I don't see the repeat season for Leonard Fournette. I think it's going to be a little bit of disappointment when it comes to expecting that kind of return on value, especially drafting him in the 3rd. I'd much rather pass and grab somebody else in that area. Zeke is still available, Aaron Jones, Montgomery, Connor. I'd much rather have James Conner over Leonard Fournette, much rather have Zeke. And even in that area, Mike Evans on the same exact team. I would much rather take Mike Evans and wait to see what I can get in the later rounds. Maybe I can scoop up Rashad Penny, Melvin Gordon later on and feel better about it if I drafted a running back in the 1st round. But I'm definitely not looking forward to when Leonard Fournette comes around that tier if I'm there in draft spots. So it's a pass for me. So, John, what do you think?
So I'm going to say this, but take it with a grain of salt. I'm willing to draft Fournette. Obviously, it comes with stipulations. If people like-minded like I and you and I, if Connor gets drafted before you expect it and Zeke gets drafted before you expect it, if people are going RB heavy because everybody knows that the wide receiver pool is pretty deep this year, you don't want to pass on to somebody like Fournette. Brady just lost Gronk, so huge target share. Chris Godwin, injury, won't be there to start. Yeah, they brought in Julio, but how old is Julio? 33, I think. So he's not going to demand an extreme amount of targets. You got Evans there, who's going to get his work in. But Leonard Fournette is the modern day James White for Tom Brady. He's a PPR machine. He finished, I believe, PPR 6. So I like that in PPR. If he's the 10th RB off the board and he's going to finish at 6, I'm willing to take that shot. Now, granted, he doesn't have great touchdown upside because Tom Brady's going to pass the ball 1,000 times now that they have an extra game and they're going to have 3 excellent receivers. But with 2 passing options disappearing, some of that work is definitely going to be shifted onto Fournette. I know there's some competition in the background, so might get siphoned, but Tom Brady knows Fournette. If I'm not mistaken, I think Brady was trying to get Fournette at one point when he was on the Patriots, but I like Fournette here. I'm willing to take others, but I'm not so heavy on passing on him, so I'm willing to draft him early to mid-3rd round.
Yeah, and they do. They have, insane weapons over there. When he says 3 wide receivers, he doesn't mean Julio Jones. He means Russell Gage, right? He means Russell Gage. Because Russell Gage season. It's Russell Gage season. But actually, before we move on from that, I have just one question for you. Would you, at that spot, you need a running back. This would be a running back 1, Leonard Fournette or James Conner?
So, at like my first running back off the
say
board.
For example, you got 2 wide receivers or a wide receiver and a tight end. You need a running back 1, and you want to draft one right there. You're staring at Fournette and Conner. Which one do you take?
I think at that point I might go Conner. They're pretty close in draft positions, but Connor has a high upside, especially with touchdowns, and doesn't have as much of a backfield competition.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm definitely the same there on Connor. For me, I love over the moon about Connor this year.
Fournette might be a more stable, ground to play on. Like he's gonna get plenty of targets.
I think Connor's a pleasant surprise this year, and he's gonna make a lot of people happy. All right, moving on now to a very controversial player that we always do, in fantasy, controversial in fantasy that is, would be Ezekiel Elliot. So this is somebody who has slipped down draft boards quite a bit in the last few months. He is currently going at ADP 30, which is also in the third round, but it's just not normal to see Zeke in the third round. You know what I mean? It's just not normal to see that name there. So for me personally, it's really going to come down to where you are in your draft structure again. Obviously that third round is a little, kind of rocky. You're not exactly sure how you're feeling with your foundation. You're trying to make the right moves for there. But I do think that if you're staring at a situation like we just talked about where, maybe James Conner's gone and you're staring at Zeke and Leonard Fournette, me personally, I would draft Zeke in that scenario. And I am willing to draft Zeke in the third round with not much, I'm not going to be that upset or that worried about it. He finished last year as the running back 7 in what we probably all perceive as a down year. So obviously, Tony Pollard, I'm hyped on Tony Pollard. I think that he's a great, player who deserves and is going to demand targets. We hear stories about how he could be sliding into the slot this year. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but if he does slide in the slot and they use Zeke as the focal point like they should be, I definitely do see Zeke being the guy who we want him to be after offering that consistency with a massive a highly massive upside when it comes to that fantasy value. So he is a little bit, one of those risky guys where you're, a little bit worried, but I think he's far past where he was last year, and he still was running back 7 despite that. He played all 17 games, whether or not he was in all 17 of those games. I think you're going to see a lot more of him being, kept under, a snap count at the beginning of the year maybe where they, limit his reps. But towards the end of the year, the back half of the year, I think Zeke is going to definitely feast. Once we get over that Thanksgiving hump and whatnot, I think from then on there, you're going to have a massive, Zeke bump. So maybe if you don't draft Zeke, you try to trade for him after the first few weeks if they're down. But me personally, third round, 29th pick is his current ADP. I'm definitely willing to draft Zeke.
So a lot of people felt like they had a bad taste in their mouth after last season or two of Zeke. I know 2 seasons ago it was different, injuries, battle line, that's just a matter of circumstance. But last year, he had a great season. Finished RB7, PPR, had over 1,000 yards on the ground, almost 50 receptions. That's you still want that, but 12 touchdowns. So he has great opportunity. Tony Pollard's workload has increased a little bit, but I don't think he's on the same level as Zeke. Just recently, they were saying that Ezekiel Elliot to be the focus of the run game. I hope that's true. He can do the work if he's given the work. With Amari Cooper being traded or released, it doesn't matter. I would never draft Cooper anyways. With those targets disappearing, they got to go somewhere else. Now, CeeDee Lamb's definitely going to get a little bit more. I think James Washington came in. He's going to take some, but some of those targets are going to fall back to Zeke. So I like Zeke. I will draft Zeke, especially if he's late third round. That's insulting to what he can be capable of. So in the end of the third round, mid-third round, early third round, if I want stable floor, good ceiling, I will draft Zeke.
Right, and I think, and what we were talking about, or what I was saying in the first, segment of the show, at the top of the show, talking about Christian McCaffrey, the identity that Zeke's given right now, I'm kind of shocked that that's not the identity that CMC is given, When you have Leonard Fournette and Zeke in the third round going at that kind of back half or maybe, middle of the third round, I don't understand how CMC doesn't get the same stigma. You know what I'm saying? So when you look at somebody like Zeke finishing as the running back 7 last year, playing all 17 games, and he, gets that identity that he belongs in the third round, but Christian McCaffrey doesn't, I just don't understand it. And that's why, just kind of highlighting my point of Christian McCaffrey being overdrafted from there. I think he definitely belongs in that realm of, tiers when it comes to running backs. He belongs amongst them, DeAndre Swifts, the Zekes, the Leonard Fournettes. That's where Christian McCaffrey, I think, belongs. That's your risk and reward section where you're saying, okay, now I got to plug somebody onto my team and I can take the chance on, them being the one out there and, kind of giving me that consistency. So, if there's concern about Zeke, there needs to be that same concern about CMC. So the upside I see, but I think, to your point, John, it's for both. And it's, the upside is there for him to be that absolute smash play running back every single week. So moving on from Zeke, we got 2 running backs left for you. Let us jump right into DeAndre Swift. And John, I'm going to let you take the lead on this one. DeAndre Swift, 23 years old, currently going in the second round at ADP 14. He's going off as the 6th or 7th running back off the board, maybe 8th. Yeah, he's in the top 6 or 8 going off the board.
He's basically rounding off the curve. He might be before the turn. He might be right after the turn. You can never predict how the draft will go. But I've been flipping back and forth on Swift because the biggest thing in my eyes, and it's a bad stigma for me to point out, and it's almost stereotypical. He's on the Lions. I don't really want any piece of the Lions, but I can't deny Swift has a great chance to return on investment. Detroit has upgraded their offensive line. Now, granted, he only played, I think, 13 games last year, so his stats are low, but if you average, that up to 17 games, he had a great year. It would have been about 200 touches, 800 yards on the ground. Might want a little bit more. End of the first, beginning of the second, running back. But 80 receptions he would have had. That's where you get the turnaround. And that's if Detroit can pull it off. So I don't know if I'm willing to draft Swift at the, beginning of the second when I can get an excellent receiver. CeeDee Lamb could be there. Stephon Diggs could be there. Jamar Chase might fall there possibly, but I think I'm willing to take the chance on the receiver at that point and come back around and get a Zeke, Fournette, Connor, Barkley if he comes, Montgomery. I might take the chance with those to get the elite receiver rather than take a shot on Detroit and Jared Goff.
Right, and I think I'm starting to come around more, into your idea of DeAndre Swift here. And, I personally think that DeAndre Swift has an absolute chance to really put this team on his back this year. They finally have a coach they can rally around. They're slowly getting better. They add Jamison Williams, so their wide receiver core is getting better. They're going to have Hawkinson back. So the offense really, when it comes to offensive weapons, they have quite a bit. And the only thing really standing in their way is Jared Goff. So me personally, I love the idea of having DeAndre Swift on my team. The only problem is, to your point, John, and what I'm sort of coming around to is that I might get outpriced from him from where he is being drafted at, because if I'm looking at, probably the first round, early second round, and I grab CeeDee Lamb and I'm rolling around to the second round, and I'm still staring at, Nick Chubb, Alvin Kamara, Barkley, I would maybe take Chubb over Swift, but I'm probably going wide receiver at that point because there's so many wide receivers on the board that are just absolutely, monstrous. So if you're in a 12-team league and you're sitting around 8 and you get a CeeDee Lamb and it can roll back and DeAndre Swift is still sitting there, then yes, I'm definitely drafting DeAndre Swift with confidence that he's going to be my running back 1 and I could get the return on value from him because, like John was saying, when you average out his stats and you pace him out for 17 games, they're not crazy running back 1 numbers, but I do believe that those numbers increase quite a bit. I don't think Jamal Williams is that much of a threat. We saw him a lot last year. I think you see him a lot less this year. I'm stoked on what DeAndre Swift could be. It really just depends on where he falls to me in the draft. So it depends on the league size, where you are drafting. But DeAndre Swift is probably not one of those players that I'm going to reach up for in a draft where if I'm desperate for a running back, I'm going to take him instead of taking the best available wide receiver on the board because I'm always going to take the best available player in those early rounds unless I'm really struggling and the running back pool is really thin and I think I can, supplant my wide receiver strengths later on. I'm usually usually grabbing the best player off the board. So I think that where DeAndre Swift is going, he's right in that little sweet spot where it's going to be hard for me to draft him compared to who's next to him. But as far as my confidence for DeAndre Swift to be a running back one, it is up there. And I think that, DeAndre Swift within the top 10 of running backs this year is almost a smash guarantee. So I do. I love DeAndre Swift. It's just where he is kind of giving me a little bit of anxiety that I might have to pass on.
So let me give it a little more perspective. Looking at his stats, 151 attempts on 13 games. That's 12 attempts on the ground per game. Granted, that number might be skewed because I believe he left one of the games injured. But even with that being said, the same thing with targets. 78 targets in 13 games, that's 6 targets a game. So if he's only going to get 18 touches on the ball that high in the draft, I don't want that. And his rushing numbers, 39 yards, 37 yards, 47 yards, 16 yards. I don't want any part of that. I will take a receiver or a later running back.
Definitely for where he is. So, John, a little bit more pessimistic on the the stats going up. I do believe that you do see him, you could see him going up. But then again, it is Detroit. So it's hard to buy into Detroit like that. All right, moving on to the last player of the show. We got Travis Etienne currently going in the 4th round around pick 45 to 48. Trevor Lawrence getting his boy back finally. Now, me personally, I am in on Travis Etienne, but much of the same point of DeAndre Swift, it really depends on who's there. You got Jalen Waddle, DJ Moore, Amari Cooper, Lamar Jackson, Josh Jacobs around that area, so it's really a plethora of who you need at that area. So this is that big running back cliff where I'm willing to take a chance on somebody who could be an absolute PPR machine. And I think that Travis Etienne especially has that ability to be a PPR machine, teaming up with Trevor Lawrence. He's going to fall in home leagues. He's going to fall in a lot of leagues. So I think once draft day comes, instead of him going in 4th round like we see in mock drafts, you actually see him realistically go in the 5th round, early 6th round. So me personally, I'm high on Travis Etienne's potential to be that guy. James Robinson tore his Achilles late last year. Obviously, Travis Etienne sat out all of last year with the Linz Frank foot fracture, but I think he is completely recovered from that. All signs point to him to be ready to go. The camp footage looks good, so I'm definitely excited to see Travis Etienne get in there this year, and I think that if you can get him once you have your team structure kind of set and you feel good about it, you're not reaching up to kind of supplant other areas that you messed up at. If the draft is going well and you want to take a shot on somebody who could really, really fire up your team, I think that Travis Etienne in the 5th, 6th round might be a good investment depending on your team structure and what you have going into that round.
Let's see, today, current ADP is 42.9, so he's going at 43. He's, near the end of the 4th round? No, I can't do it. He hasn't established himself in the NFL. Yeah, he has a connection with T-Law, but James Robinson is still there. Yes, he got injured at the end of the season, but it only takes about 6 to 8 months to recover from that, and we've passed 6. We're approaching 8. He's going to be back, maybe not for the first few games, but Robinson is going to come back and disrupt the backfield for ETN. I can foresee this backfield going 50-50. The coaching staff is different. Didn't really use Robinson like he was capable of, but at his current ADP, I won't touch ETN. I might, if I got bench space at the end, I think I'd take Robinson.
Right, yeah, and I'm definitely a little bit more overzealous when it comes to this pick. This is one of those picks where, for me, it's, kind of just, I want that upside and I'm going to get my guy, but I definitely think that for most draft strategies, you probably lean John's method here. It's better safe than sorry when you're playing fantasy football. This is that high risk, high reward player for me, where, this could really blow up in your face and Travis Etienne doesn't do much and he returns value like Chase Edmonds did when he was on Arizona, and you thought that, that was going to be something, and then he just broke your heart because James Conner took everything. So it could easily be that. So I definitely see John's philosophy, and I would probably advise that when it comes draft season, you take John's philosophy. But if you can get Travis Etienne later, if he does fall, like I expect him to, especially in home leagues, I think he's one of those players that is definitely going to be in my sleeper, talk. He's probably going to be one of the first people that we talk about in sleepers because he is going kind of high. But I'm a big fan of Travis Etienne. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the August 1st show. That is episode 1 of the 2021 season. Thank you so much for joining us. And John Landry, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this show. Super stoked to have a co-host here with me, hanging out, telling me that my Travis Etienne, to be careful with telling the people that you could not tell people they have to draft Travis Etienne in the 4th round. That's why it's good to have a co-host. So everybody, thank you so much for joining me. We will talk to you soon. Everybody, have a good night. Bye-bye.